There is no greater illustration of U.S. military and foreign aid region building than the operation over the past decade in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and their regional bloc SAARC, the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. As infrastructure in U.S. cities is crumbling, American lives and billions of U.S. dollars are being spent to connect these countries into the infrastructure, commerce, and regulatory mindset of SAARC. The region-building infrastructure objective there is being called the New Silk Road.
I've spoken before of the vision of a new Silk Road in which Afghanistan is firmly embedded in the economic life of a thriving South and Central Asia. And we are delighted to see this vision coming to light through the Istanbul process and various regional trade and transit agreements.
The campaign to embed Afghanistan into SAARC has been a protracted mission in a volatile region fraught with great risk both to the populations of the region and to the region builders themselves. It has been a bloody, gritty effort to regionalize nations with populations that wish to remain independent, but whose elitist leaders are being enticed with regional infrastructure deals and trade incentives. Political leaders and high commanders have taken advantage of the noble motives of those who have joined the U.S. military to win a war on terrorism. That mission has become, in reality, a war to eliminate resistance to region building. Americans have been given a classic bait and switch through the use of euphemisms and vague generalities. As America's sons and daughters train to fight terrorism, they are being instructed on how to disarm populations who resist the world community. They are being told that it is right to preemptively strike populations who have not attacked America, but who have leadership that the world would be a better place without. Once Americans discover that region building is the real objective of U.S. policy in Afghanistan and Central Asia, as well as in Africa and the Middle East, it also becomes apparent that globalism is not the inevitable process that has been portrayed in business and academic circles. Globalism is being forced upon the populations of the world as it drains the resources of the United States. Bill Clinton inadvertently admitted that globalism is being forced upon the world in a 2004 speech full of contradiction at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, in which he intended to relate that globalism is just an inevitable course of world history.
All of human history is a story of increasing contact. We move from isolation to interdependence to integration, to an environment of shared benefits and responsibilities and values. Right now, globally, we have interdependence. It's good and bad. You all know why. We're struggling to get to integration. Most of you in this room want to lead the world in that direction. So our job is to move the world from interdependence to an integrated environment of shared benefits and responsibilities. The anti-globalization people think it's impossible, so they want to go from interdependence back to isolation. You can't do that. It's not physically possible. But a lot of their criticisms are right because we are caught in the middle between interdependence and integration. And if we just sit here and claim the benefits of interdependence without pushing the world into an integrated environment, which requires systematic change, not serial interesting things, we will find it is unsustainable and dangerous.
If globalism is so inevitable in the course of world history as Clinton implied, why does it need pushing? Why is it such a struggle? And why should we all be led in that direction? At least historian Ethan B. Kapstein, at the time director of studies at the Globalist Council on Foreign Relations, was more forthright than Bill Clinton and most other globalist proponents on the matter. Writing in the May-June 1996 CFR journal Foreign Affairs, Kapstein wrote, "For international economic integration is not some uncontrollable fact of life, but has deepened because of a series of policy decisions taken by the major industrial powers over the last 45 years. Growing income inequality, job insecurity, and unemployment are widely seen as the flip side of globalization. That perception must be changed if Western leaders wish to maintain the international system their predecessors created. It is important also to note that Bill Clinton used the term interdependence as an intermediary step to political integration, but conspicuously avoided the term independence as the original condition, and instead deceptively referred to it as isolation. Clinton's subtle deception and ad hominem stereotyping of any who would dare object to globalist integration is an old tactic of subversives and revolutionaries. Of course, isolation and independence are not synonymous. A nation can remain engaged with other nations in trade and dialogue, yet still maintain its right to defense and self-determination, without entering into collective security and trade pacts that sacrifice its sovereignty. Surely, in this age of digital conversion rates and Google Translate communications, a system of efficient global business transaction can be maintained without forcing nations to surrender their sovereignty for such a system as described by Capstein, with vast regional regulatory and governance jurisdictions run by market manipulators and fascist-minded central planners who manage trade while acting under the guise of free trade. The Internationalist, a blog sponsored on the influential globalist Council on Foreign Relations website, posted this November 2012 article that adds weight to the mounting evidence that U.S. forces are in the Middle East for umbrella security to enforce region building. The writer states the obvious, that the main reason for lack of regional integration in the MENA, Middle East North Africa area, is that these nations are among the strongest defenders of national sovereignty in the world. No doubt that attitude is motivated in large part by a religious fervor that will not accommodate Judeo-Christianity, but the ironic fact remains that these populations share this strong defense of national sovereignty with America's conservative Christians. In the poorer Arab League countries of the Middle East, grassroots Islam sees regionalism's underlying globalism as a product of Western secular influence. However, this very Islamic fervor, a major catalyst behind the Arab Spring uprisings, will also be the thread that is used to bind this Arab bloc. The kingdoms of the more affluent Arab Gulf region are relatively more bottom-line business-oriented than the poorer nations of the Arab League, and have been better able than most Arab nations to isolate themselves from the Arab Spring unrest due to their social programs funded by oil revenue. Grassroots Islam abhors the notion of compromising into the current globalist system, but does allow for a united Arab region as a means to launch a global Islamic empire. The globalist elite will not consider that scenario, but they will manipulate religious sentiment to strengthen the Arab League under Islamic law. The globalist objective is to allow a manipulated Arab Spring chaos to run its course to change the political landscape of the Middle East completely. Follow-up UN peacekeeping missions will then work to see that every government in the Arab League is cooperative towards the world order, following the example of the Arab Gulf region. The recent systematic deposing of the more pugnacious dictators in the Middle East and Africa is not indicative of a Western policy to spread democracy, as has been presumed by many. Not only have the governments replacing them not brought in the liberty and freedom as advertised, but al-Qaeda operatives were known to be a significant part of their power base. This regime change instead reflects a systematic policy to allow, in some governments, more Islamic sentiment to unify the region, and in others to replace leaders who are not team players in the new regional structure with more cooperative successors. Some, like Gaddafi, bought into the regional concept only so far as to unite resistance to the colonialist financiers of globalism. Gaddafi envisioned one Africa, but he wanted it to be his African Union, as evidenced by his audacious King of Kings proclamations. Economic hitman John Perkins explained how Saddam Hussein was deposed in Iraq.
Economic hitmen were not able to get through to Saddam Hussein. We tried very hard. We tried to get him to accept a deal very similar to what the House of Saud had accepted in Saudi Arabia, but he wouldn't accept it. And so the jackals went in to take him out. They couldn't do it. His security was very good. After all, he had one time worked for the CIA. He'd been hired to assassinate a former president of Iraq and failed, but he knew the system. So in '91 we send in the troops and we take out the Iraqi military. So we assume at that point that Saddam Hussein is going to come around. We could have taken him out, of course, at that time, but we didn't want to. He's the kind of strong man we like. He controls his people. We thought he could control the Kurds and keep the Iranians in their border and keep pumping oil for us. And that once we took out his military, now he's going to come around. So the economic hitmen go back in the 90s without success. If they'd had success, he'd still be running the country. We'd be selling him all the fighter jets he wants and everything else he wants. But they couldn't. They didn't have success. The Jackals couldn't take him out again. So we sent the military in once again, and this time we did the complete job and took him out.